Agape, I just feel it's not, just a church where you walk in and you leave and no one notices. I really feel like the people here are family, and it's something that we're always hanging out together, we're always doing life together.
So Agape is really a family-oriented church, It's not a service that you just come to and, get your word and then leave. So you come, you meet people, you greet them, you all get along well, and you get in the Word of God together, and then you go out and fellowship together.
From the time we stepped in to the time we left, we were just overwhelmed with people. Just people fellowship, people welcoming us, people making us feel very comfortable, very much at home, very much like we were wanted.
My favorite part about being in Agape is that I've never really heard the gospel the way that I've heard it here, and so it's different, and it's just so wonderful, and it just really fills my soul. So I like this, and I've not seen it anywhere else.
My favorite thing about Agape is being able to serve and help with the community and help with the church. And I think just being able to serve and be in that spirit of service is the best part of being a part of the church.
I think Agape is the greatest sense of family that you can get, and it's just a great sense of community that holds you accountable and really helps you grow in your faith, and also it's just a great group to be around, and they're constantly just supporting you.
So at worship, I play the drums, and so that I really enjoy that, and I also love being part of the band, and it's a great time.
So what I love about this church is the community, and that we're all so close and always there for one another. Whenever someone's going through a rough time, you have everyone there as a big community of sisters and brothers.
I think that people should come and visit Agape because we have such an incredible and diverse group of people here. We have people from all over the world, all over the country, all over Texas, from different walks of life, different ages, and we all come together for one purpose, and that's to serve God and love each other. So I think it's a place that anyone could call home.
Loving.
Fellowship.
Community.
Family.
Worship.
Church.
Love.
Agape.
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 He is the professor of infection disease and internal medicine at the chairman at MD Anderson. And he is the chair of the Department of Infection Control and of the Employee Health at MD Anderson as well. As a physician, I think he had changed how we practice medicine, to be honest. For generations to come, he taught us how to practice medicine, how to practice infection disease. With his research and a big team at MD Anderson, he has 400 scientific articles in high-impact peer-reviewed journals and over 30 book chapters he had written. And let me turn the page quickly to him being a scientist. He had 70 patents for invention that he came up with. And I would not underestimate that he saved and already will save hundreds of thousands of patient lives by his inventions. Then I will turn the chapter quickly also to him being a man with a heart after God. And he is the founding and the president of Health Outreach to the Medical East. We call it HOME. It is a non-denominational, interdenominational organization that exists to offer physical and spiritual healing to people regardless of their color or religion or sex. It is a real privilege, Dr. Raad, to introduce you. There is no other pleasure in my life I can imagine. Please, let's welcome Dr. Raad.
Thank you, Issam. For those people who are with us from MD Anderson, I just want to say that Issam Gargawi is one of our graduates. He finished his fellowship training in infectious disease, and this is why his statements are a little bit biased. But in all honesty, I think very highly of Issam. He's God's reward to our lives. He's such a humble man, an outstanding infectious disease physician. I'm so proud of him, and a dear brother of mine. I really thank God for him. I really want to thank the young adult people who called me to kind of give these lectures, especially in this the Arabic service for them. At the same time, I wanted to reach out to the young adults and also the Agape group, which is a agglomeration and their language is in English. So it was very difficult for me to kind of give this in Arabic. And then I reached to some of my friends who are here, whom I would like to welcome, especially today, as my colleagues, and some of them are in medicine. But I know we have a tremendous group of people from various backgrounds. And there is always this kind of a challenge to us. People in the university level, or people who are graduates, or people in the sciences, whether they are the life sciences or they are the physical sciences or applied sciences like engineering. There is always the big challenge wherever you are, because many times in our mind, and I faced it through all my training and then practice as a physician scientist, is we think of, on one side, science, whether applied sciences, as one category, and on the other side is God and creation. And we think that faith on the other side, on this side, which belongs to, is more of a leap in the darkness. It's more a step of, when we think of faith, that you have to close your eyes and just jump and believe, and you don't have to question that faith. But after being a man of faith for a long time, and I give all glory to the loving God who adopted me and who brought me through Christ Jesus, I discovered that our God is a God of reason. He created the human mind, and He would like us to ask questions. And the great person who had a great impact on me, and in terms of his books, is Francis Collins. Now, Francis Collins is one of the leading scientists in the world. I think he's one of the most leading scientists, particularly in the area of genomic medicine and genomic biology. To give you a little bit background about him, he had PhD in quantum physics, and then he did his MD at some of the best places in the world. And then he did specialty in pediatrics, and then he did another specialty in internal medicine. And ultimately, he was the director of the National Human Genome Project. He's the person who defined the human genome. And finally, he came up to the highest level that any physician scientist would come to. He's currently the director of the NIH, the National Institute of Health. Now, if you are in medicine or the biomedical sciences, this is the leading position worldwide that any person can achieve. He writes a book, and the title of that book, The Language of God, which I have a copy with me here, but I would like to kind of direct you to it. And in that book, he says, the elegance behind life's complexity is indeed reason for awe and for belief in God. And he describes in that book how he was convinced that there should be a creator and an intelligent designer when you study the DNA. I mean, if you want somebody, a scientist, who has studied the DNA, who defined the human genome with all the DNAs in it, it is this person. And he writes this, but he writes in the sentence before that, he says, a believer should embrace science and should not be threatened by science. Because true science testifies to the fact that there is a tremendous, intelligent designer behind this universe and behind life. And so I'm taking the testament of this man to tell you that my presentation, the topic is so broad and so complex. We're going to talk a lot about irreducible complexity. And I don't think within 1 hour, maybe, lecture that I can really give it its all. There's going to be another session next week. But I don't think the 2 lectures would cover this. We really need a lot. And I might not be able to answer all your questions, although I would like to kind of address them in a time for questions and answers. But I say all of this to tell you that the main theme, this is just an appetizers. Tarif, appetizer. So just to kind of, for you to kind of whet your appetite, today is to show you the tremendous intelligent design behind the universe, and particularly behind life. And that you cannot escape this fact. It's much more difficult to believe in the fact that everything occurred by chance than to believe in intelligent design, because of all the scientific facts that I would like to present to you today. And I'm open for your opinion. But from now in 2017, when we have the great testament of people like Francis Collins and scientists with a conscience that I call, to going back to the early times of the great giants who discovered the major laws. The one who discovered, for example, the law of gravity, Isaac Newton. He says in the basically 17th century, he makes the statement, the most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and the comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent, powerful being. And the same is true for Lord Kelvin. We've all studied his basically equations, the laws of thermodynamics, and he existed in the 19th century. And he says if we think really hard enough, we find ourselves forced through science to believe in God. So you remember that we stand on the shoulders of these great scientists, and these great scientists, the more they studied science and they came up for these great discoveries, is the more they were certain that there should be a great intelligent designer behind this universe. Johann Kepler, many of you know about the Kepler, especially people in the astrocosmology area, and especially given the fact that we are in proximity to NASA here. He says, God is by my endeavors also glorified in astronomy, for the heavens declare the glory of God. Now, beyond the rhetoric, let's go to the certain facts that when you look at the whole universe around us, you cannot but be stricken by the fact that this universe is so well designed and so well coordinated. And there are some things that you cannot explain to have happened in any form or fashion. Mathematically, it's impossible to explain them to have happened by chance. Let me give you one simple example. The distance between the Earth and the Sun. Why is it that the Earth, in order to sustain life, is at exactly the right distance from the Sun? If we were 1% closer to the Sun, we're almost 93 million miles away from the Sun. But if we were 1% closer to the Sun, there would be no life sustained on the face of the Earth. But there would be death because we will be all burned. It will be so hot. But if we are 1% away by distance from the Sun, from the distance towards the Sun, then we would be the whole kind of Earth would be a globe of basically ice, and there would be no way we can sustain life. But there are so many examples of this that would really give you a sort of tremendous insight. There is overwhelming evidence. To use the word, actually, there is a preponderance of evidence. When we come up with a certain invention, you have to present preponderance of evidence to the fact that you have come up with something. You have to be able to kind of show it. But repeatedly, when you study the universe around you think the tremendous design. For example, the Earth tilts 23.5 degrees to its head. So its head is tilted 23.5 degrees. This is so essential for us to have 4 seasons. If it was 22 degrees, we will not have the 4 seasons. If it was 24 degrees, we will not be able to have. It has this right tilt to be able to have the kind of 4 seasons. But then there is something tremendous in terms of the radius of the Earth. the radius, the diameter of the Earth, if it was 10% more, again, the same thing. We would be able to it would be so hot, you will not be able to sustain life. It was 10% lower, then you will not be able to sustain life. We have the right size, the right distance from the sun, the right tilt to be able to sustain life. And I can keep going on and on. Our atmosphere has just the right thickness and composition around it to keep us alive. But also the framework around us, which we call the ozone, is made in such a way, which we're messing up, by the way, is made in such a way to protect life and protect us from the basically the bad radiations, the ultraviolet light that comes from the sun. The sun is put in a certain place, in a certain as a powerhouse to sustain life. And it's amazing. Amazing when you see the what I call the symbiotic or the synergistic relationship between the sun and the plant, the green plants, through the process, which is a phenomenal process called photosynthesis that we all know about, which maintains what we call as the balance and sustains life. Photosynthesis is an incredible process. How can you explain it? How did this exist by chance? How can this be? It sustains life. And you all know what photosynthesis is, which is basically through the sun, basically the activity of the sun and the light of the sun, that would be this process where green plants would transform carbon dioxide into oxygen, which will sustain animal life, including us, the Homo sapiens. So what you find all through is through all of these details, these very specific designed processes, you find not only an intelligent designer, but a caring designer who really cares for life and has made it in such a way to protect life. And what is the opposite is humanity is messing things up. We're messing things up in a major way. Look at the issue of global warming and the forest degradation, for example, and what the impact we're having, and what impact we're having also on the ozone layer. And it's our folly, but in terms of the designer, he has done everything in such a beautiful way to basically sustain and maintain life. And when we go to life, you cannot examine, and I tell you, I'm just going from one point to the other, but because the field is so huge. When you when you think of the Earth, its rotation, think about also the the uniformity. Uniformity. Now it's told that in terms of whatever number you want to give for existence, the Earth moves around itself to have the 1 day rotation of day and night, and then moves basically around the Earth in such a way with that tilt to have the 4 seasons, but moves in exactly same time period in such a way that the sun would hit the next day exactly at the same time. So within 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds to 1 of a fraction of a second, 1 over 60th of a second, you find that the Earth now is moving to the same spot in that area to where the sun is, which we call a day, which we call a full day. Isn't it amazing that we're never delayed and we're never coming late? And it's exactly the same timing which keeps the whole thing. It moves in such an accuracy, In my meeting, I have some of my colleagues. We try to want to make sure everybody comes on time. So we asked ultimately that for every minute of delay, you pay $1. But then we all stopped because we were all paying a little bit of dollars. Sometimes there are some emergencies. But the sun, thank God, the sun doesn't get delayed. And in terms of the Earth, with respect to the sun, its rotation and all its complexity. But let's go very quickly, because I know that there is much to cover, then to the program of life, the code of life, which is the DNA. It sounds like a simple molecule, but it's such a complicated molecule. The DNA is an incredible molecule, 3 billion chemical bases that are all put in such a way to make it a functional DNA that would ultimately, through the various RNAs, we've all taken biology, and whether it's a transfer RNA, or whether it's the ribosomal RNA, or it's a messenger RNA, which is extremely important, basically forms all the proteins and sustains life. But there is a code for everything in you based on this tremendous computer program within every cell. And you know how many cells we have. I mean, there is more than 12 trillion cells, and there are 4,000 genes in human DNA. It's tremendous structure. How did this happen? Is it all molecules that came together? Is it more the carbon and the hydrogen and the oxygen and the nitrogen that just kind of mixed each other with this tremendous code? But let me tell you some details about the amazing DNA, and this is what really Francis Collins says in his book. As the leading genomic scientist and the nucleic scientist worldwide, he tells that the DNA is the chemical inside the nucleus, which we all know, but if you uncoil the DNA helix, I mean, it's put in such a coil, and you won't be able to see it with your own eyes. You have to see it under a microscope. If you uncoil it in a single cell, it's going to be around 2 to 3 meters, but it's coiled in such a way that you basically cannot see it. It's so small. And there are 3 billion pairs of chemical bases, as we mentioned, in 10 trillion cells. So if you take all the DNA in one human body, you'll be able to have a trip. You can build a bridge to the sun and back 70 times. This is all in your human body. And, you know, the amount of information in this DNA is just incredible. Now, I'm trying to tell you this because if you look at your iPhone and you go to somebody and you say, you know what, this iPhone that I have, it came out because of molecules that just mixed each other and just came together. And this is how my iPhone came. And people would think that you're crazy, basically. Isn't that right? The first thing they would do at my hospital is they would consult psychiatry. I mean, they would just kind of... and try to kind of explain, because he said, no, they were molecules, but it took a lot of time. It really, millions of years, these molecules came in this iPhone. But you know, iPhone, how many megabytes it has of information? It has tremendous. It has around 120 megabytes. But you know the DNA in your human body, how many megabytes it has? 150 trillion. It has 150 gigabytes. 150 trillion gigabytes. So if you divide them over all the iPhones present, I tried to Google today how many iPhones are in the world. They're almost the number of humanity. There's 6.8 billion iPhones present in the whole world. So divide them. We are, in your own human body, there is more DNA that would kind of contain information, more than 200 times than all the iPhones present in the whole planet Earth. Did this come by chance? If one iPhone didn't come by chance, all the iPhones on the planet Earth, you have in your human body 200 times than the collective sum of all the information on all the iPhones in the planet Earth. So you see, there is overwhelming evidence. I mean, there is no way you can stop, you can keep going. But this is why somebody like Francis Collins called it the language of God. And the one other person whom I extremely respect, and I would like to kind of share his books with you, is Professor Michael Behe. He's a biochemist. But he comes in and he talks about it with these uses. The first time he uses in 2006 this term. Actually, in the 90s he described it, what we call as irreducible complexity. But I would like to call it, in our systems, in our biology, in our cell, not only the irreducible complexity. You cannot reduce it. What is irreducible complexity? And I will define it further. It is a system that if you take one little part of that system, the whole system will not work. Which makes it impossible that this system could develop, whether it's the DNA, whether I'll describe other systems for you. It has developed gradually by bits and pieces. Because if it is composed of several parts, and each part is absolutely necessary for the whole function of the whole structure. And I will show you certain cascades which are really tremendous. And actually Darwin himself said if such a system would exist, because at his times, more than 150 years ago, he didn't know about all of these systems. He had no idea about the DNA and about the nucleic part of the cell. He called the cell a simple cell. It's not simple at all. It's an irreducible complexity, which is tremendous. But this, I call it more than irreducible complexity. It's irreducible coordinated complexity. It's so coordinated together and so integrated together. And I want to here use another quotation from Francis Collins, whom I deeply respect. And I wish we were able to advertise more when he came to Rice and gave his important lecture. As director of the NIH, he said there is an intricacy and elegance in biology, particularly the information carrying capacity of the DNA, which is rather awesome. And moments of discovery become moments of appreciation of God as the creator. So all what I want to do this evening is to dispel this notion that when you talk about God, because I mean, even if they laugh at you in sciences, it's, and don't make this dichotomy of talking about God means religion and science is on the other side. No, I think we as believers should embrace science, because science testifies that there is a great intelligent designer. And I say it with confidence that everything around us out there talks about an intelligent, caring designer. And I'll give you more examples about this. So we're going back to the human project, a genome project that was led by Francis Collins, is 10 years of research to find the human genome, to find the genes. And you know what? Until now, there are many genes, we don't know what's their function. But we have discovered all the genes there. We don't know. There's some of them, we call them the orphan genes. 40,000 genes in the human DNA, 3 billion chemical bases. And I told you about the tremendous megabytes that are out there, 150 trillion gigabytes in the human body. But look at what's driving then the whole idea, that the way we became and the way we came into being. So what is the idea that of atheistic or evolution, and what's the kind of the thing behind it? And the thing behind it is that there is, well, Darwin initially talked about genetic recombination. He didn't have a great deep idea of genetics. He had no idea about mutations. But he talked about the basically natural selection that occurs. But they get big folly now that all scientists agree, even the ones that are called neo-Darwinism, they agree that he was wrong because he attributed many times acquired traits to be genetically transmitted. So he gave the example of the giraffe, and he said the giraffe in Africa are horses that try to extend their necks to be able to get the apples and to get to the fruits. And with time, as they extended their necks, this was inherited. This was an acquired trait which was inherited and was given genetically to the elements. So they are horses with extended necks. It sounds very logical, but it's wrong. Because if you are a man and you get an amputation of your arm, it doesn't mean that your child is going to be amputated. It's an acquired trait. You don't give to your offsprings an acquired trait. So it's wrong. Everybody knows he was wrong. So then after it was sort of accepted as a science, which is not reproducible, by the way, many scientists said, well, no, forget about what he said. He was wrong. But the main thing which is driving the engine of change, common ancestry, and we came into being, is what we call as mutations. And these are the point mutations. And you say, well, give me examples of this. Well, they give you a few examples. But reality now, we all know, in today's genomic biomedical sciences and biological sciences, that by far mutations is a bad thing. They are harmful. It's extremely rare to find a beneficial mutation. Some people say it's the ratio of 1 in 10,000. I'm talking about but it's even worse, because we cannot find basically a mutation that would really maintain a better fitness for the new organism. Well, one example, for example, they give, the only one in humans that really they say, is, well, a mutation, for example, look at sickle cell disease. You know, sickle cell anemia, for those who are in medicine or biological sciences. But you say, but this is bad. When you have sickle cell, I don't know if you treated, some of us here treated Dr. Simon, maybe you did treat people with sickle cell, but it's a miserable disease, and they have a longevity which is on the low side. So you say, but this is bad, the mutation. He said, no, but if they are in Africa, and they're exposed to malaria, malaria parasites cannot enter these red cells, the sickle red cells. So they're protected. Well, it's true, but only if you exist in Africa. And the second thing, even in Africa, the lifespan of sickle cell disease patients is lower. They're less fit than other Africans, even those exposed to malaria. And then now there is the big science in my area, which I would like to kind of share a few slides here with you, is the big science, or the, I don't know, we're stuck here. And it's, so there's a big science of mutant organisms that are not fit. And here, I don't want to talk about anybody's, head in a way, because I know that this is an area where few of us in microbiology and infectious disease we're comfortable in, but maybe others are not. But let me explain it, try to simplify it as much as possible. When you talk to somebody, he says, no, come on, Dr. Raad, you should know more. You're an infectious disease, you're a microbiologist. Now, these bacteria, when you give them a lot of antibiotic pressure, and this is why we don't like to prescribe antibiotics so widely, because these bacteria would develop resistance to the antibiotic. And how they do it, most of the times, they do it by developing mutation. So this is survival of the fittest. Don't you understand, Dr. Raad? Now I'm pretending like somebody is talking to me. And I understand. But these mutant bacteria that have developed mutations, they're not more fit. They develop mutations, but there is a cost to their kind of mutation. They're less fit. Anderson, one of the leaders in Nature, basically Nature Reviews, one of the highest impact journals in science, writes experimental studies and theoretical modeling, and there is preponderance of experimental studies, show that the basic concept that resistance is often associated with a reduced bacterial fitness. But this is not only bacterial fitness. It's parasitic fitness is decreased when you have a mutation. So mutation ultimately is bad for the organism. It cannot be driving a better change, more orderly change. This is the whole concept. It cannot be the promoter of survival of the fittest. Yes, they survive that antibiotic, but ultimately they are less fit. And then, the more recently, and this is the article that just came out recently, it shows that this is in 2017. It goes one after the other in kind of attesting the multi-drug resistant, the multi-antibiotic resistant bacteria, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Acinetobacter. The same is true for an organism that many of you know, which is MRSA. The same thing, the more the resistant they are through mutations, the less fit they are. So if it's the survival of the fittest, if mutation is driving the survival of the fittest, because it's a beneficial mutation, it doesn't exist. And it was tried in the lab, basically through the fruit fly, where they exposed them to radiation to kind of get them to kind of these fruit flies. You know what fruit flies are? So they tried to expose them, and all of a sudden you find a fruit fly with no legs, another one which is blind. Because mutations, through whatever exposure they are harmful usually to the organism. Now, having said this, so let's go back to the DNA. So how can you explain this reducible complexity, this coordinated system, this tremendous information system, but also basically the source, the energy house, the production of all the energy and the proteins that we have? How can you explain it? And here there are some really scientists with a conscience. Almost a decade ago, a little bit more, Professor Anthony Flew, one of the most renowned atheist scientists, but well-recognized scientist, he makes a statement that I regret the enormous damage that my writings have done. He says, after investigating the DNA, it has shown to be most unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life, that intelligence that must have been involved. And there are many other people, but I think one of the major arguments is the mathematical impossibility of explaining this to have happened by chance. It is basically mathematically impossible, and let me give you some examples. If you bring a card of basically a deck of cards of 10 only cards. And they're numbered from 1 to 10. The way we play cards, they're 1 to 10, all right? And you mix them up. What are the chances that you're going to come out? You just mix them one more time, mix them another time, and they're going to come out to be 1 to 10 another time. It's almost basically 1 to more than 3 million. The chances that they're going to be in that exact order, you see, the order of things is so important, particularly with time, is 1 in 3 million, more than 3 million, 3,628,000. All right? 800. But what if you have 100 cards and you want them to get, what is the chance, all right, when you do it, that they're going to come into 1 to 100. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They're going to come. It's 1 to the 10, 158. What is 10 to 58 now? You've learned some math. It's an incredible number, 158. So the chances are for that order is extremely low. You understand what is 1 to the 10, 158. So a trillion is 10 to the 12. It's only 10 to the 12 is a trillion. A trillion is 1 to the 24, 10 to the 24. This is 158. So what about the cell? Because a lot of things within the cell, it's tremendous. Like the past president of the Society of the National Academy of Science, when he says the cell is like an incredible city with multiple factories. So Professor Golay in England, a British mathematician and a scientist, he said, well, if you really, the chances that you will get this complex cell, because nothing called simple cell, all right, with the DNA structure in it, with the Golgi bodies, with all the kind of components, the lysosomes, the centriole, the chances is really incredible. You know what are the chances for all of this? Is 1 over 10 to the 450. So the fact that all of this has happened by just simply chance is 1 over 10 to the 450 means impossible. Let me tell you why it is impossible. Let's play some more math. Any people likes math here? Maybe I'm too much. So let's play some math game. And I wish this slide was bigger because I realize you can barely read it. But look at what is the chance, okay, think about time. When they come to you, the evolutionists, and they tell you that the life of this, the Milky Way galaxy, the galaxy that we live in, what's the lifespan? It's estimated to be around 14.5 billion years. But there are other galaxies around us, and they say, well, we don't know, but it's maybe 1 to 3 trillion. Let's say 1 to 3 trillion. How many seconds are there in 3 trillion years? Let's talk the largest kind of number. The seconds that we have in 3 trillion years is kind of depicted here, which is 10 to 20 seconds. 10 to the power 20, which is a 10 billion trillion. All right? So 10 to 20. Now look at the space in this Milky Way galaxy. The whole space, if you measure it by light years, it's 5 billion light years, which if you transmit it, if you want to travel there through it, it's 5 billion light years. This is a big number. So these 5 billion light years would end up to be 10 to the 130. Okay, so this is space and time. Space and time. Space is 10 to the 130. Time is 10 to 20. Multiply them by each other, you'll end up in the chances that if every second there was a positive event leading to life, to a cell, every second in the history of this universe, no matter how old it is, every second there was a miracle that has happened leading to that positive event, in this big space called the Milky Way galaxy, it's 10 to the 170. Okay, it's a huge number. But the problem is we have to get it to 10 to 450. Now, I know I confused you with the numbers. But to get to 10 to 450 is impossible. Because even if every second in this big universe that we live in, there was a miracle occurring, we're way off. You see how difficult it is to believe that it is just by chance, by rolling dice? It's much easier to believe that there is an intelligent designer by just looking at the cell, one cell. And it's much easier to believe that. And actually Darwin himself said this. And you have to realize that, many people misunderstand Darwin because at the end of his life he was struggling with that concept. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, not knowing the DNA, but we have it now, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. I think this is why his theory would break down. Because it's so complicated, it's so irreducible complexity, but it's coordinated complexity. Now, I think Sir Frederick Hoyle, another professor of astronomy, who was an atheist, and he's a professor of astronomy in England, and he studied the probability of life happening by chance, and his conclusion was there should be an intelligent designer. And let me tell you why. I think he gave this example. Fred Hoyle said that the chances of life resulting from time is like saying a tornado. Can you imagine tornado? We have tornadoes here, or hurricane. Sweeping through a junkyard might have assembled a Boeing 747 from the material of that junkyard. It's exactly the same. Look, this is a 747, Boeing. The idea that a big bang hit, and then all of a sudden you have this tremendously organized universe. And then life that came being, all because of this kind of a catalysmic, disorderly event, is like saying that a big tornado hit this junkyard. A big tornado hit this junkyard. And you know what the result was? Was this 747 just flying. Can you imagine? It's just incredible. I mean, that's why it's so difficult to believe in the kind of theory of chance. Well, give it enough time and it will work. Let me tell you why. Something more intimate to me as a physician, scientist, particularly in the field of infectious disease and internal medicine. And maybe some of the physicians here would relate to this, is look at the coagulation system. Say, please don't confuse us. We don't understand coagulation. Let me simplify it. Let me tell you a little bit of a story. If you have some water, a bottle of water, anybody has a bottle of water with him, and if you puncture it on one side, the water is going to immediately go out. Is that right? If you puncture it from the bottom, the water will immediately collapse. Now, if you have a cart of milk, and you put in it whatever, your child is a kind of a naughty child, and he puts in it something, and all of a sudden the milk would collapse. But if you and I are injured, there is a mechanism. This is why the intelligent designer is so caring. There is a mechanism that goes there, which is the coagulation cascade, to make sure that we don't bleed to death with every injury. You see what I'm saying? Otherwise, if there is a little bleeding, if they draw blood from us, we'll keep bleeding forever. But there is something called the clotting mechanism. Now, we take life for granted. We think of clotting and so on. But look at the coagulation behind it. When they taught us in medical school, I was in awe. And they say, you know what, the professors would teach us, and they would say at the American University, where I was, American University Beirut, and they say, this is the wisdom of Mother Nature. Until one professor came, he was in GI and gastroenterology, and he says, this is the wisdom of Father God. Today is Father's Day. And my Father God created your Mother Nature. This is an incredible thing. You see, what was wisdom of Mother Nature? But they call it, this is incredible. Look at the cascade. Now there is more than 20 proteins out there, but it's a cascade. Every single one is dependent on the other, and you start from factor 12 and factor 12A, and you keep going until you get to fibrinogen. You get here. I'm sorry, this is not lighting here. But look here, you get to this ultimately, but it's a cascade. And there is the intrinsic pathway and the extrinsic pathway. And Dr. Shaftari knows it more than I do, because she studied for her internal medicine board recently. But look at the cascade, you can't skip one of them. If one of them goes wrong, you bleed to death, like the hemophilia. Is that right? Like factor 8, which is gone. So you need every single one of them. But at the same time, it could not be partial development, that it's on the way. You can't say the system will work if you only have the first 2 steps, or the first 3, or the first 4. You need to have all of them. Otherwise, you will not be able to activate, at the end of the cascade, fibrinogen into fibrin. It's an irreducible, coordinated complexity. Like your iPhone. There should be some intelligence behind it. You can't imagine that the molecules hit each other and then you ended up with the iPhone. And this is exactly what it is. 28 separate proteins and enzymes. Each one is dependent on the other. But look at one more complicated system, which is incredible. Complicated, but so coordinated and so well designed, is the immune system. I tell you, the immune system, well, people do PhDs in both coagulation, and there is a subspecialty in immunology and subspecialty in basically coagulation. But this is an incredible, I think this is projects very small, but there is something about it. You have so many cells, each one well divided, like they are an army. You know, the white cells themselves we kind of talked with, which is innate immunity. And you have the neutrophils, and you have the basically various ones, the monocytes. They work together in such a coordinated way. And then you have the basically acquired immune system, which is the, or adapted immune system, which is the helper cells and the T cells, and then the B cells. And then you keep following one or the other. It's amazing, so well coordinated. And within that system, I don't know how many people are in medicine, but you know, I know this is confusing, but how many people in medicine here? But I'm sure you studied the complement system. You know, if you're sitting for your boards, and particularly the first step or the second, you know, look at the complement system. You know, how many steps are there? Look how complicated it is, but well coordinated. If there is one complement missing out of all of these complements, the immune system will not work. You have complement deficiency. And Dr. Issam Gergawi, an excellent physician, I would say, and scientist in infectious disease, Dr. Hashim, Dr. Shaftari, they would attest with me that if one complement is missing, you have certain bacteria invading that organism or that patient, and they would die. You know that. C5, C6. So it's a well-coordinated system. How can you imagine the system that came by chance? But you know the greatest miracle in all of this, which is the idea of being well-designed, is how does that coordinated system, specialized, recognize foreign versus basically self? Do you understand what it is? Well, you get a bacteria. All of a sudden, the whole system starts working, mobilizing. Okay, the B cells will start moving, and they start want to produce antibodies. And then they produce antibodies against them through the plasma cells, but the helper cells would help them. And then the innate immunity comes in through the macrophages. And then there is opsonization through the complement. And the whole system is working like an army, like a tremendous army. There is the Navy, and there is the Marine, and there is the Air Force, and they're working all together. But how do you recognize that this bacteria is foreign? And they don't attack their ally. They don't attack the red cells or the white cells. And if they do, there is the autoimmune disease, which is 1 per 100,000, which is extremely rare. And you tell me, well, some, you know, just give it up. You know, but the system is not perfect. I'll tell you, it's not perfect 100%. And I'll tell you why. Because there's something that in my belief system called the fall, and this is why there is some imperfections in it. But it's still more perfect than any other technology we have and any other army that we have around the globe. Let me give you one example. I'm a student of history. In the first Gulf War, when President Bush mobilized more than 40 countries and they attacked Iraq, and they went there to fight them, they started bragging, Schwarzkopf, who was the head of the joint forces, that we have as the army, we have the smart bombs. We hit the target, the enemy, and we don't miss. We just destroy the enemy, the soldiers. You know what happened in the first Gulf War with the best mechanized system, the best army in the world, and all of the allies? More than half of the Allied soldiers that were killed by friendly fire. We destroyed more of the US Army and the British Army than those who were killed by the enemy themselves. We missed big time. Yes, ultimately the war was a big success to start with. But look, this doesn't happen with the immune system. It knows exactly what is foreign is being foreign. When you do transplant and you could put foreign kidney, all of a sudden it attacks it as a foreign. It doesn't attack your own kidneys. So there's something incredible there of not being coordinated, complexity, diversity, but there is recognition and destruction, and there is tolerance to your own tissues, to your own self. And look at this diagram. I love this diagram. It simplifies it and makes it in cartoon, and we teach it to med students. And I don't want to belittle med students. We actually teach it to biology students, pre-med, and even in high school. But look at this. Even when simplified, it's still complicated. I showed it to my wife, who's a genius in math, and she said, this is too complicated. It's above everybody's head. So if it was hard for Lamia, my dear wife, who's much more intelligent than me, because the system is complicated, but it's so coordinated and so beautiful. And it's a reflection that the intelligent designer cares for you. He put a system for you to protect you against bacteria, against viruses. By the way, some of the cells work against viruses. They're like the Marines, and some other work against the bacteria, and some of the others, the parasites. Have you ever wondered why parasites, and basically you have the eosinophils go out versus in the lymphocytes, and basically the helper cells are the major players when it comes to viruses, and the basically phagocytic neutrophils are the ones that are major players against bacteria, most of the bacteria and the fungi. So they are specialized, but it's a great system to have. Is it a product of chance or accident, or is it an intelligent design? Well, I think it's a product of intelligent design, and I want to give this little example. Recently, I became a grandfather. So tomorrow is a very great day for me. Not only I'm a father, I'm also a grandfather. But you know, this my grandson, Sammy, I kept looking at him. And then he started looking at me and wondering why his grandpa keeps looking at him. Because like I observed him all the time, I'm sitting there, I'm saying nothing, but I'm just observing him. You know what really kind of amazed me? Because I really thought of all what I learned theoretically. You know, a sperm came from the father, an egg from the mother. They became the zygote, one cell. And I was looking at Sammy and I say, one cell made all of this? What causes differentiation in embryogenesis when this one cell forms in the uterus of a mother? What made it when it multiplies? Some cells will go to become the nervous system and the brain. Some other cells go to become the myocytes and they form the heart. Some others form the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract. What causes this differentiation? What is that in embryogenesis? What is the cause? Nobody can answer you, except the fact that we are so wonderfully made. There is splendor to life. There is an amazing part to life. And look at him here. He's looking again and wondering, what's wrong with Grandpa? He keeps looking at me. And I'm looking at him because I'm wondering. I'm wondering at the amazement of life. And you have to wonder. Life is not by chance. No way it could be life by chance. And it could not be, because you cannot reproduce it also in the lab. And the minute you kind of raise that question, they would look at you and say, look, it takes time. You know, when we were little kids, they used to kind of teach us that the little frog became ultimately a prince. You know, and we say, we would laugh. In a fairy tale, we recognized it. Even when I was 4 years, I knew that they were telling me a fairy tale. But you know, when we became older, they want to tell us that molecules became man. But it took, listen to us, it took a lot of time. You say, why can't you reproduce it in your lab? Because it's a matter of time. It's millions of years, actually billions of years when life existed. 100 millions of years. So they tell you we cannot reproduce it. So if you cannot reproduce it, You cannot call it science. It's a theory. You see, when I present certain papers or I present something for an invention, and when I present them to the patent office, they want to make sure it's reproducible in somebody else's lab, that it works like it worked in my lab, that you can repeat the experiment. Here they can say, well, we cannot reproduce it exactly. We have some observations we have in nature, but if you cannot reproduce it, no matter how much you claim the element of time, and because of the factor of time here, because I can't keep you for the next century to explain all what I have, I want to tell you, Professor B, he did some calculations. Okay, you can't explain it in human beings and animals because our generation is long. For example, until I got a grandchild, it takes 2 generations. Each generation is at least 30 years. All right? But you can look at the other, basically, microbes. Look how rapidly, for example, the HIV virus multiplies. Do we have mutations? Yes, we have mutations in the HIV against, basically, some of the resistant. But do you have a different HIV virus, something else, erythrovirus, which is different genus? No. These mutations have not resulted in genomic structural change, which leads to what Professor Behe and all the people who know about genomic medicine, which we call as basically protein-protein binding sites. A different protein-protein binding sites. Yes, we have resistance with E. coli. Actually, the one person who did a great work on this is Limsky. Limsky has kept basically his E. coli now for almost 25 years and produced billions, if not trillions, actually 10 to the 13, 10 trillion E. coli over all of these years. Over 30,000 generations, which is equal millions of years for the chimpanzee, and he can't find one new organism which is similar to different species. Yes, there are few mutations which are harmful, but nothing that would lead to beneficial change that would move it from one species to the other, or even one genus to the other. So it's kind of and here Behe kind of does the mathematics. It's going to take I'm not going to go over it, and I'm not going to make it complicated here, but he tells you, look, how come after 10 to the 20 E. colis that have been produced, 10 to the 20 HIV, 10 to the 20, which is the 100, which is the 10 billion trillion malaria parasites that we have produced, we haven't seen one genomic change that would result in a protein-protein binding site. In order to, for example, to move towards different species or form, for example, the cilia, you need hundreds of genomic changes. And he says, look, to move from one species to the other, you need, 10,000 genomic sites. We haven't seen one of them with all this massive production of these microorganisms. So we come to kind of this dilemma of the factor of time. You can't hide behind it. It's not in anybody's favor. There is no way this could have happened by chance. Now, I can go on one law of the other, but I just want to highlight the laws of thermodynamics, the second law of thermodynamics. You know, the people who are interested here in physics, and I know we have really heard the engineers and the people who are more in the physical sciences, if you may, because we talked in our domain and biology and all of that, microbiology. But I want to reach out to you. Engineers here, especially mechanical engineers, know very well about the laws of thermodynamics. You know what the second law of thermodynamics, which you can reproduce every day, which is the basis basically for all mechanical engineering? It says that all physical systems, when left to themselves, any process which is spontaneous moves in a direction of entropy. Delta S is greater than 0. Do you remember that equation? Delta S is always greater than 0. It moves which means, entropy means, from order towards more disorder. Anything left to itself. Put an apple here with time, it becomes not a better apple. You see what I'm saying? Everything moves with time towards more disorder. This is the exact opposite of what evolution teaches. I'm talking about naturalistic, atheistic evolution. Because things left to themselves have moved from dispersed molecules or atoms, formed molecules, formed the DNA, moved towards more order, and ultimately came with the Homo sapiens. The same thing with the whole universe. A disorderly catalysmic process, which is the Big Bang, hit, and all of a sudden you have this very orderly universe. How come delta S is supposed to be greater than 0, not less than 0? You know, the only thing which is less than 0 is life itself. And death, when death occurs, delta S is greater than 0. It means that to have life, you have to go against that kind of process. For the generation of life from no life. But then the big question, why aren't we able to produce life in the lab? And this is something we have to ask. Why aren't we can't reproduce it? Now, let me go a little bit about my brother-in-law car. Now, in 10 years, if I tell you, in 10 years, it's going to become a Rolls-Royce. He has a shabby car. He lives in England. And then in 50 years, it's going to become an air balloon. The same thing, a hot air balloon. You start laughing at me, and you think that I'm crazy. But this is his car. And actually, in 10 years, he threw it in the junkyard. It didn't become this Rolls-Royce, and didn't become this kind of hot air balloon, and it will not become a hot air balloon in 50 years. So this is kind of something that we all have to live with. The other one is law of cause effect. We all know that this is the basic rule in science and basically logic, that for every effect there needs to be a cause which is at least equal or greater than the effect itself. And this is well-established law that in all our experiments governs it. Then the law of biogenesis by Louis Pasteur. You see, at the time of Louis Pasteur, at the time when Louis Pasteur was being he was challenged by the theory of what they call as a spontaneous generation. That life comes from no life. And what was the theory based? Is that if you leave in garbage and trash, all of a sudden you find a lot of fleas. They used to think that the fleas are coming from the garbage, not being attracted to the garbage to eat. So they said you'll find a lot of fleas and flies and insects and all that kind of thing. He proved them wrong. He took the broth. They used to say, well, broth, there will be always bacteria. Well, bacteria would come there because there is broth to eat. And when he basically boiled the broth, there was no bacteria. They were dead. So he came with the law of biogenesis, which is a basic law of biology that we still kind of adhere to. But now, the idea that life came from no life, well, say, prove it. And we have people who tried to attempt to prove it, like Dr. Miller. It was basically sham. There is nothing in the lab with all the PhDs that we have and all the MDs and all the big guys and all the funding we have. Why can't one lab produce anything similar to a replicating life? Not even a virus, not even an RNA virus that would replicate. They say, well, we got some inorganic material and got some organic material. Get me a DNA, get me something which is living. Why after 50 years of intense research by the greatest, brightest minds, the best and the brightest, we are not able in one lab in the West or even in the East to produce something similar to life? So we need, so if all of these minds that have well-designed experiments were not able to produce life, how can I believe that this came through time spontaneously? And then let me give you a few final examples, the human brain. You know the human brain, how many neurons or brain cells we have? In the brain itself, this is not the brain itself has 12 billion neurons in it. Each neuron is connected to another 10,000 through 10,000 connections. And you know these connections, these are synaptic electrochemical connections. There is a current going on. You know, it's like a battery going on. It's a 4-volt battery, which is going on all the time. It cannot stop. And it's going all the time there. You know, if you multiply this, how many connections there are? 120 trillion synaptic connection. Each synaptic connection, you know how many switches it has? How many switches on and on? It has around 1,000 molecule scale switches based on the words of Professor Stephen Smith from Stanford University. Now multiply 1,000 by all of this. You end up with a number where a single human brain, no matter how sub-average it is, your human brain has more switches than all the computers and internet connections in the whole world. How did this come into being? Now, I was talking to a medical student, and he says, well, what's even more is the way this kind of electric system, it's a computer which is on all the time. They tell you, well, shut it off a little bit, give it a rest, weekend, give it a... No, it's all the time on, and it's all the time working. It's an amazing system, isn't it? It's an amazing system. And you know what keeps it there? This great balance of sodium-potassium that keeps that kind of 4 volt always going. What we call it homeostasis. Why? Why is it so balanced? If the sodium goes down, it's a disaster. If the little bit down, if the sodium goes up, if the potassium goes down, it goes up. The same thing with the heart. It's an electric charge, an electric pump. Now look at the eye. I'll finish with the eye so that you keep looking at me. The eye, 130 million photoreceptors. At least we call them the cones and the rods. Remember your biology, rods? When you're in the bright light, it's the rods working, cones in the night. In the dark, 130 million photoreceptors. Now, simultaneously, we can easily interpret 500,000 messages. You know, in 1 second, this is in a split of a second. The estimate is 1 billion messages we can interpret. Again, by Dr. Alan Gillen, no human camera, artificial device, or a computer-enhanced light-sensitive device can match the contrivance of the human eye. Nothing like it. Now, I ask forgiveness here for the specialist of the GI system or hepatology. You know, I can speak volumes of the liver. What about the kidneys and the nephrons? What about the gastrointestinal tract? What about the lungs? And I can go one system after the other. I missed a lot of systems, and I have begged forgiveness, but we don't have time. Now, Charles Darwin, at the end, made this kind of important statement. I'm greatly challenged by the extreme difficulty, or rather impossibility, of conceiving this immense and wonderful universe, including man, with his capacity for looking forward and backward as the result of blind chance. I feel compelled to look at a first cause having an intelligent mind, and I deserve to be called a theist, that is, a believer in a God. So I touched on a lot of bases. I won't go around them, but next time, this is introduction to next time, I'll finish, and we'll open the kind of floor for questions, one question at a time. I want to talk a little bit about some evidence that demands a verdict. Next time, it's going to be a little bit different. Now, we talked about the compelling evidence for an intelligent, caring designer. But why I believe that this designer, who is the designer? The loving God, the truing God that I believe in. Look, on some verses, and I will just throw them in. These are only appetizers for next time, so that you will not miss next time. If you're out of town, cancel your trip. Just come next time. So, Isaiah 40:22. You know, Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, written, and Marie Shafter read the book of Isaiah and studied it very well. She can give you a glimpse of it. But the book of Isaiah was written 722 years before Christ. It predicts Christ. It speaks so beautifully about Christ is coming, although it was written hundreds of years before Christ. But then you find in the whole Bible some verses that are compelling to tell you that this is a unique book. And it has the specific revelation of this intelligent, caring designer. Look at this one verse. It says about God, He sitteth upon the circle of the earth. Actually in Arabic and in Hebrew, the original language, He sits on the sphere of the earth. Kurat al-Ard. How did that book, written 700 years before Christ, and which is more than 2,000 years, 2,200 years before Magellan discovered that this earth is spherical, that it is a spherical structure. How did they discover it? You know, even today they are still talking about Galileo was persecuted by the nominal church because he said it was spherical. And even today there are some people who are really fanatically and would say, no, it's still a flat earth. But no, this is hundreds of years. And so many other verses. I love this verse where it says in Job, which is written 1,500 years before Christ. And by the way, the issue of the spherical earth is well compelled by Christ himself when he talked, again, 2,000 years ago, when he talks in Luke chapter 17 about the day when he comes back. He says that some people would be sleeping, would be in bed, and that night, and in that day, some people would be, when there is sunlight, plowing the field. How could this exist simultaneously if it's a flat earth? You have to have a spherical earth in chapter 17 to explain the words of Christ. It tells you that this is a book that has the truth in it. It's not a book of science. The same thing when it says in Job 26:7, he hangs the earth on nothing. You know, until the beginning of the 20th century, almost 100 years ago, they still believed that there is some substance, they used to call it the ether, which is holding the earth in space. Nobody wondered or thought that the space is hanging out there, the way we know it now, on nothing. You know what holds it? Holds it gravity. But it's being hanging out there on nothing. What is that kind of holds it on nothing? And well said by Matthew Murray, the great scientist in the 19th century. He said, the Bible is true, it's not a book of science, and the science is true, and therefore each, if truly read, but proves the truth of the other. And I love the last kind of a statement. This is my last slide. I promise you I'll stop immediately after that. James Simpson, the kind of father of anesthesia. And who is anesthesia background here, besides Dr. Shaftari? All right. So, asked what was the greatest discovery he made in life, Simpson answered that I found the Savior. I have a trust that cannot be shaken in one person, who is Jesus Christ. And I hope you'll make that great discovery in the Savior and the Creator, who loves you beyond what words could say. Let's stop here and take some questions, and let's take one question at a time. Please, if you want to ask me a question, make sure it's one question so that we can have room for the others. And I think we can have another 12 minutes for questions and answers. Okay. Who's going to have the first question? Don't worry if it's always a smart question, so whatever it is. We covered a lot of material, and I know it's a bit complicated, and it's very difficult to... Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I have always been taught that what we believe that we can achieve, if we really and truly believe that. Could you kind of expound upon that?
Yes. The renewing of our mind is also talking about our spiritual mind. But the mind is very interesting. We use only, as you will know, 8 to 10% of the mind's capacity. It's such a small organ, but has such a great impact. But it uses 20% of the energy. But if the renewing of the mind is through knowledge, but ultimately through sound knowledge of discovering the source of all knowledge. And I think this is what he's talking about in Romans 12. That the renewal of our mind there is also our spiritual insight and our spiritual mind. Because many times we are determined not to believe, because there might be ramifications to the fact that if you believe in that kind of faith, then there is a responsibility that you have to commit your life to that. And we have to always renew our mind and rid it from the toxic agents that affect us not to make right choices and right commitments for the right things. Any other questions? Yes, please.
You mentioned that scientists would not replicate life. What about cloning?
It's not replicating. It's life going into life. You see what I'm saying? You have to have a living cell to clone it. You see what I'm saying? It's not like getting no life, inorganic material, and having a replicating life. So whether it's cloning and you find all of these advertisements, test tube baby. This is a test tube baby. Well, they're getting a sperm and mixing it with an egg, or mixing things basically outside an incubator, but there is always element of life. There is that kind of thing. You need to have cellular life or replicating life. And this is exactly what's happening. So there's all sorts of things that would require in genomic medicine or genomic biology, but you need to have the element of life to get more life.
I was wondering, when you were explaining about Darwin, so are you saying that you think that you couldn't believe in a developed type of system that maybe God worked through, like through the Darwin theory? Not Darwin exactly, but that maybe God did it. I mean, we weren't there. We don't know how he did it. I mean, is it possible that he could have done it with, different, life forms or whatever? I mean, I don't know. I mean, is that a possibility?
Yeah, it is a possibility. And there are some believing scientists or scientists who believe in what we call as theistic evolution. I respect them greatly. There is another group that believe that have different basically concept and say, well, if everything points to an intelligent designer, why should he do it through, and if the evidence is lacking, why should he do it through that slow process? And what's the evidence for common ancestry? I mean, the fact that there is a similarity between the cell of mammalian cell or all cells, there is some common factors. Similarity. It doesn't mean that they came from one origin. It could be that the designer is the same. So you see, like when you go to Picasso's picture, you find they are different, but you can tell that this is Picasso, the one designer who did it. So this is the argument. And at the same time, the biblical model for creation allows wide variability. So you don't have to... so there are different views there. There's theistic evolution. There is the gap theory. For example, when it says in Genesis 1:1 that he created the heavens and the earth, it doesn't say what was the timing of the creation of heavens and the earth. It starts from verse 3 where it says the creation in 6 days were as follows. So the heaven and the earth could be millions of years. The other people believe in the young earth, and they bring a lot of creation scientists. And the father of this was Henry Morris, and now the Creation Science Institute. They believe in young earth, and there's a lot of records that they bring. So I'm open to all of these ideas. My thing today is to say that there is an intelligent designer, which all of these three groups, whether theistic evolutionist or the creationist, reasons to believe group, or the young earth group believe in, and I'm open to both ideas. But I think I'm more into the two types of creationists, because they bring a tremendous evidence, whether the reasons to believe or the young earth. They believe they have a lot of evidence. And this is why I think we need a third session about the fossil records, about the missing links. For example, they always taught us that there are missing links. They turned out to be not missing links. Like the ape man. Most of the ape man turned out to be either apes or men or pigs even. I mean, they were defined species, but they were mixed up as... There's a lot of missing links that are not missing links. And then there are a lot of surprises. Precambrian age, and you find in it certain animals. Mammals in the Precambrian age, which is, I suppose, millions of, hundreds of millions of years before they're supposed to come. So there's a lot of evidence, counter evidence, which we're not being taught in the university sessions. So I personally believe that the huge number of scientists and the reasons to believe, or in the Creation Science Institute, are really right, because they have overwhelming evidence in addition to this intelligent design. But we have to talk about it later, not next time, but maybe another session. But I respect theistic evolution. I mean, I'm fine. I mean, I'm not going to. Anybody else? Well, if you need any other information, or if I can provide you anything that could be of help to you, or if you remember a question, consider coming next week, please, if you are available. It would be a very nice session. But what I'm going to present is evidences for our faith. Again, there's evidences that, along the line of I talked about at the end. Why do I believe in the Bible and the specific revelation? And what's the evidence behind it? Thank you for your attendance and for your patience. God bless you.
Is this great or what? I think it's great, right? He deserves one more round of clap. Thank you, Dr. Raad, very much. I love Dr. Raad for many, many, many reasons, but I'd like also to be where he is so that I can learn something new. We're so thankful. Thank you, Dr. Raad. Thank you for the time and preparation, and thank you very much.